We're off. Okay, so happy Minority Health Awareness Month, everybody. This is Yvonne, and I'm joined with Jessica Williams today, and we're going to be talking about the state of health in the minority community and focus on a few things like disparities and how we can work on the disparities in our communities to help make us healthy. So without further ado, I'm going to let this lovely lady who has volunteered her time to do this interview with me introduce herself and tell us a little bit about us. So tell us a little bit about you, Jess.
Yeah, hi, thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Dr. Jessica Williams, and I am a general dentist, and I am doing a residency in dental public health. And so this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. Even though I do focus on dentistry, I also focus on general health disparities in general. And so a lot of my work is trying to combat health disparities. And so, yes, this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
And thank you for coming and
Mhm.
for offering your expertise to us so that we can learn a lot about what's going on in our communities. So let's just top off the time together with what are health disparities? Talk to us about that.
Sure, yeah. So health disparities are preventable differences in disease and injuries and opportunities among different populations and different groups. So they can be racial disparities, they can be geographic disparities, they can be age disparities. It's really just when you look at two groups of people, why is one group more successful? Why are they able to achieve more optimal health than somebody else who's in another population group?
Okay.
And the key is that these are all preventable things. These are things that it's like, well, why is it that if you look at two people who are both 40-year-olds, two women who are both 40 years old, why is it that the Black woman may not survive a delivery opposed to perhaps like a white woman? So it's like there are things that are preventable that really don't make biological sense, and you realize that it's something that's social or something that's systemic.
Wow. Wow. It's a lot to learn. So we know that systemic racism, as you say, something systemic. We know that systemic racism is one of the causes of health disparities in African American and other communities of people of color. What variables cause the disparities in our country?
So it's a concept of really social determinants of health. And so, as we said, systemic racism is definitely a cause, but it's interesting because systemic racism also drives some of these social determinants. And these social determinants have to do with where you work, where you live, where you play. So your zip code, they've even found disparities among people who live in different zip codes. So they're the social determinants, your education, but also more systemic issues like policies. You have even a concept of political determinants of health, that there are just policies that automatically cause health disparities or disparities among different groups. Housing, infrastructure, environment, this again, the world in which we live, work, and play are all factors that can make one group have more optimal health than another. And honestly, as I said before, systemic racism is found in a lot of those things. So it's a very complex system, very complex problem.
I was, and let me know your thoughts on this. And this is just kind of me thinking aside based on the information that you were giving us. I was in another interview last year when I took this project on, and I learned that racism itself is a health outcome. What are your thoughts on that? And, how do you, I was like blown away. I'm like, yeah, it is, your zip code will determine whether you're healthy or not. And so just
Well,
thoughts on
it
that.
dep- well, doing research, it depends on your problem and it depends on your question. So you
Okay.
have an exposure and then you have an outcome.
Okay.
So if we're saying, we could say that some aspect of policy has an outcome of racism.
Okay.
So it depends. So you can really name whatever your question is, and you name an exposure and you name an outcome.
Okay.
Usually when we talk about public health, racism is the exposure.
Okay.
So racism is what's happening, and then the outcome is
Oh,
and then the health is the health outcome that we're usually talking about. So like maternal mortality rate or cavities. That's our outcome to the exposure of
absolutely.
racism.
Wow. I never thought about that when you said cavities. I'm like, I was, wow. See, you learn something new every day. At least I learn several things new every day. But how do you think the current unrest, and I guess that's a global unrest, will affect disparities in African American communities?
Well, I think that unrest, and Martin Luther King said a variation of this, but it really does make sense. It's like a variation of unrest is the unheard. So the unheard needing to be heard. So it's really about what's happened. What I've noticed is that the unrest makes people say what's going on and what issues that they're having. So it's really about what we do after we hear that. And it seems like in some respects, the system is hearing people and saying like, okay, we are going to address we're going to address health equity, we are going to address the disparities. And so it's really about following through with that energy and really making sure that your voice is heard. And I think that I'm very positive about what can come out of this, because again, I think that when there is unrest, that there are things that people are trying to get out. And so I think that we need to take that energy and make it positive and figure out a way to make healthcare more equitable for everybody.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's true. And what efforts are being made to make health more equitable that you know of, maybe in your area, because I know you're on the East Coast, I'm in the middle of the country right now.
Yeah. So there are, especially now in the past couple of years, there's definitely been a ramping up in especially public health research to address the issue of health disparities. But I would say that there are changes happening on all levels. As we talked about unrest, I think people are realizing what they need to do, communities are realizing what they need to do, really demanding more of the system to help with these disparities, to help with the systemic issues.
Mhm.
So really, a lot of things are happening in pocket at all levels, in all different pockets. And again, I think that comes from the people saying like, "Hey, this is a huge issue."
One thing that they've been doing here, because I'm in, like I said, the Midwest, in the Chicagoland area, there's two really positive things that have happened that hit the news. And, to your point, you're saying people are doing it, communities are doing it. Some of the communities here in the city, there were some students, excuse me, that, and I wish I could find them. They took over what used to be a liquor store, and they gutted it out, and now they've made it a farmer's market for the local
Mm-hmm.
area people to come. And like I said, the story ran so quickly, I'd have to backtrack it. But
Mm-hmm. That's
to your
wonderful.
point, communities are getting involved, and that's one of the things that the community did. And another thing that I hear that they're doing here, there's young people in the communities that are starting
Hmm.
grocery stores. I
Yeah.
mean, grocery stores, like
Hmm.
real grocery stores with healthy foods and things like that. So I'm really, when you say that, I get really excited, and I'm like, yeah,
Yeah, very
us.
hopeful, very hopeful, very optimistic. Yeah.
Yay for us.
Hmm.
So, what are some of the changes other than the ones that I talked about that you know of that people are doing at the neighborhood, the town, the state level? to get some of those changes made. Now, I spoke about the middle of the work of where I am. What are some of the things that you've seen maybe in places that you have been and in
Hmm.
places that you are where you are now? Just anything
Hmm.
maybe you've heard off the news or things that you're actively involved in.
Hmm. Oh yeah, that's a lot. Again, I say that it's really all levels and all sectors. And that's what's important because the issues that we're facing are more than just about health. There are things that impact health that what we traditionally think have nothing to do with health. So like housing or environment or just politics in general. But all of those things play a role. And so to me, when I see people who are like, you know what, I'm going to run to be on this school board. To
Okay.
me, that is a action to make healthcare more equitable because education absolutely impacts health. And so there are actions that I think are happening that aren't traditionally like, oh, health, doesn't seem health related, but these are all things that still impact health. So if we educate each other and if everybody is informed about health disparities, again, that person who's sitting on the school board who has that in mind and understands the importance of education and how it can have a positive impact on a child's well-being and a child's health, it's super, super important. And I brought up cavities before, right? And
Mm.
so a lot of interventions are geared at the school level with children. If a dentist is also involved with the school board, or if they talk to that person on the school board, we can make sure like, oh, well, let's have screenings. Let's make sure that we get the
Oh,
kids um, school forms. So they all have to make sure that they see a dentist by the time that they're 6 years old or by the time they're 8 years old. So there are certain things that there's definitely opportunity for collaboration between sectors because again, a lot of these problems, a lot of these health disparities are the product of social, economic, political issues. And so if we stay informed, if we make sure that we let our voices be heard, uh, write, write, write your stories. If something happened to you, write it down and share it to your political leaders, share it on social media. Right. I can't tell you the power of your story and how that much that can make a difference.
oh wow,
Mhm.
that's huge because oftentimes, like you said, we feel like we're just one person in this
Yep.
great big old pie, but that's a great point. You know, you might be one person that can affect five more people or
Mhm.
10 more people, and your one story can go, you know, like we hear things going viral, you know.
Mhm.
So I mean,
Mhm.
that's an amazing point. You know, you think about, well, nobody's going to listen to me, but you have no idea. There might
You
be
have no
10 people that could
idea.
identify with
Yes,
you and
exactly.
say,
Mhm.
wow,
Hey, this happened, right? This happened to me too. And then you guys all get together, and then, people realize, oh, this is a problem. We need to address this. So,
that's,
absolutely make your story heard.
I love it.
Hmm.
I love it. That's a great thing that we can do, especially at our neighborhood and our community level.
Hmm.
You see a lot of people doing that now, like in our area, they've got like a email newsletter for our block, and then there's one for the town, and then there's one. So
Hmm.
that's a
Yeah.
great point. Great point. Um, so what can people do, you know, on a personal level to improve our health? Well, I know with you, I better brush my teeth or I'm not coming to
Yeah.
see, or I'm not coming.
And floss.
And floss, exactly,
But
and
yes,
floss.
so yeah, there's so many personal things that we can do think about preventing things from happening. And like I said, there are a lot of issues that are beyond what we feel like are beyond our immediate control, but there are definitely things that we can do to improve our own personal health. And that, the things I'm going to list are going to sound so cliche, but they are really the components of being healthy, which is sleep, drinking water, limiting sugar, staying active, moving, eating fruits and vegetables, like a balanced diet, reading, keeping your mind sharp, going to your primary care providers if you can afford it. And I really want to say if you can't afford it, because access to care is a huge, huge issue in this country, and not being able to afford being able to see a doctor or a dentist is a huge barrier to care. And so I say if you have the means and you can see your healthcare provider, do it, get your baseline idea, because what I find is that some people just don't understand where they're at. And when you don't understand where you're at, you don't understand what you need to do. And so that's why I definitely encourage going to that primary care provider and getting a baseline of your health status, and understanding your labs, understanding your blood, understanding your blood pressure, and and then that way you know what to do after that, and follow through with the recommendations as best you can. Because again, I understand that there are these other factors involved that make it difficult to find fresh food, or make it difficult to afford that medication that you're supposed to take. So um, try to do as best as you can to take care of yourself, and see a primary care provider, and understand where you're at, so you can understand where you need to go.
Wow.
Mhm.
Um, I have one last question for you. And can you, I know that right now you're doing a fellow, explain
A
that to
residency,
me. Yeah,
yeah.
you're doing your fellowship.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so in your studies, because I know you're probably doing a lot, I know about getting, because
Mhm.
I've been there not too long ago. You're doing a lot of case studies and things like that in the field. What can you talk to us about studies that are focusing on those health disparities and
Mhm.
inequalities, and some of the solutions that might be being worked on and maybe possibly implemented to make those changes occur.
Mhm. Again, what's interesting is the emphasis, because public health is, for the most part, always been aware of social of inequities, and very well, I would say more recently than the past 2 years, 2 or 3 years. They had been working on it like 15 years prior, is that concept of equity instead of equality, right? So giving
Mhm.
people what they need and meeting people where they are. And so what we found is that when it comes to health disparities, we really need to look beyond. We need to fix what's going on in healthcare, in the healthcare sector, but we also need to look at things that are traditionally not seen as health. So like I talked about, like um, housing, urban planning, income, employment opportunities. So public health realizes, and they understand that there are interventions that are non-health interventions, or seemingly non-health interventions, that are actually very helpful in reducing health disparities. And so, for example, and they happen at all levels. Again, individual level interventions, community level interventions, and then the larger national population interventions. But for example, there's definitely been an emphasis, as I talked about, children. And children are the future, and children are in early education is definitely a point of intervention for a lot of public health, a lot of public health interventions. And that again is because children are the future. But also, it's like if you teach good habits, if you're able to make it so a child is really healthy while they're a child, they're less likely to be unhealthy as adult. And we definitely see it. I definitely see it in dentistry. So children who, and there's evidence that children who do not have cavities in childhood are less likely to have cavities as adults. And so there's a lot of attention on, again, early childhood, and they may not all be seemingly health related, but they essentially, that's what health disparities are. They're a result of very complicated social and economic and political problems.
Right. So basically, if you're not, for like if you're living in an area that's, not as safe as other areas, that is going to affect your health because maybe you're a little bit anxious, or if you're living in an area where there are food deserts, that's going to affect me coming to you because I'm probably going to be eating a lot of candy and sweets,
Right.
you
Exactly.
know.
Exactly. Just where
So,
we, again, where we live, where we work, transportation is a huge barrier to care and definitely can cause disparities as well. Rural areas, people who live in rural areas are very susceptible to that because they live in food deserts or they live in areas where they don't have public transportation.
mhm,
In urban communities that are low income and low educated, you may have a lot of violence. And so, like we said, you have anxiety now, you have PTSD, you
mhm,
have you're not able to focus on your studies. So now you have low education, probably not eating very healthy foods. It's not a walkable town. You can't
exactly.
walk, you can't play on the playground. There are just so many, but these are all, but those are it. But then it's like, well, why is there violence there in the first place? And when you trace it back, it's like, oh, systemic racism, or you're like, oh,
Mhm.
policy. And so it's like, it's a trickle down effect.
Yeah, and it's kind of, because we talked about unrest earlier, and it's kind of like the same thing now. Like sometimes the policies are not matching the challenges that are being met by the people, and it just gets but that's to your point. That's when you need to start telling your story, and you need
Tell
to
your
start,
story.
and you got to start writing your
Tell
your
your story.
congressperson, or and saying,
Exactly.
hey, this is really important to us. I'm just hoping that we can get there because equality is something that's needed across the board, because really generally it helps us all. It
Oh
helps us
yeah.
all because
Mm-hmm.
if everyone can be productive, if I've got healthy food and I've got pretty good sleep, and i'm
Exactly.
and i'm drinking my water because it's clean,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have things in it,
Mm-hmm.
and guess what
Yep.
I can do? I can contribute more to society. You know,
Exactly.
we're not all trying to be up here. I mean, I know people that are like, I'm not trying to climb the corporate ladder. I'm happy where I am. You need
Mm-hmm.
that person, and you need that person healthy.
Right.
So,
I'm so glad that you mentioned that because when we talk about intervention, sometimes it can seem like, well, this is only helping this group. It's not helping me or it's not helping my group. And what really you find, and there's evidence that it benefits everybody, really, at the end of the day. It's not a zero-sum game.
exactly, because people are wanting to be where they are in all walks of life.
Yep.
And if we all can be there healthy, then that's that's even better. Are there any things that you want to say to us in closing? Because I've really enjoyed this conversation. Like I said, I learned a lot, several things in this short period of time. Is
Oh,
there
great.
anything that you'd like to leave with us in closing?
First of all, thank you again for this opportunity to talk about health disparities. Like I said, it is something that's very near and dear to my heart because to the point that we just made, when everybody has an opportunity to live their best life, a lot of times they do. And when you're in a good state, you can take care of you can especially take care of others. And so it really is something that I hope that we can all contribute to, and know that we can make change and know that we can have an impact, even on a personal level. So again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks so much, Jessica, for spending
Yeah,
time with me. It is pretty early in the morning, so I really appreciate you getting up to do this
of
with me.
course.
And this has been our first interview for Minority Health Awareness Month. This is my pet project. I'm Yvonne Taylor. This is Jessica Williams. And I just want to thank everybody for listening to our interview. And if you got a story to tell, find me. I'm on the internet. Jessica, thanks so much. And you have a awesome day.
Thank you.
And